Well, good morning and welcome to you. My name's Dean Miller and I'm the senior pastor at Church of the Ascension, and so glad to be with not only our church, Ascension, but with also Christ Church Vienna this morning, and with any of you who are guests as you come to be with us. This is going to be a little bit of a unique Sunday. We're really glad to be together. We're celebrating the 12 days of Christmas. You can see that the Advent candles are blown out because Advent is over. And our service this morning is going to be just a more relaxed service. So there'll be several songs, and the sermon will be a conversation that myself and our assistant Chris Lugo and Johnny Kurcina, the pastor at Christ Church Vienna, had just a couple weeks ago. And in that, we're hoping to be authentic and transparent about what this year has been like for us. If I don't say it in that, just know, this has been a bit of a roller coaster year for me. I've been lonely, confused, disoriented. I know many of you have felt the same. So as we gather together this morning, we wanted to offer up a space where you can reflect on what it's really been like. Not only to know that you can empathize because there are people around you who are struggling as well, but also in a way to sort of circle up, hug each other and say, hey, we're going to keep moving to 2021 knowing God loves us. So if you're here as a guest, we are so glad you're here. You'll see ways to find out more information about our church. If you're regular parts of this church, you'll see announcements about your church in the emails. But we're so glad to be together. So let's sing some, let's listen to our conversation and know of our affection as we are together this morning.
Joy to the world, the Lord is come. Let earth receive her King. Let every heart prepare him room. And heaven and nature sing, and heaven and nature sing, and heaven and nature sing. Joy to the world, the Savior reigns. Let men their songs employ, while fields and floods, rocks, hills, and plains repeat the sounding joy, repeat the sounding joy, repeat the sounding joy.
My name is Dean Miller, and I am the pastor of Church of the Ascension, a church here in Northern Virginia. And this morning, you're going to have something a little different. Myself and our assistant pastor, Chris Lugo, and our good friend, Johnny Kurcina, are going to talk to you about what this year has been like, 2020. We are a few days now from being done with what the calendar year will be. And we know that even though that calendar year will have a turn, that the season of pandemic and other issues we've had will be ongoing. And so we wanted to take time, rather than sort of a more traditional service during the holidays, to take time to just honestly talk and share what it's been like for us, as a way hopefully to connect to you as well and help you feel like I'm not alone. Oh, there are good things going on, and to sort of encourage and spur us on for 2021 to live well. So we're so glad you're here with us on what is a bit of a brisk afternoon here in Virginia, and we hope you will enjoy what we do as we're together. So just a couple broad questions. Maybe tell us your name and where you live and how many weeks you thought the COVID experience would last when we first started back in March, because we're over 40 weeks now.
It's a great question, Dean. I'm Johnny Kurcina, the lead pastor at Christ Church Vienna, sister churches with Church of the Ascension, and hello to my church and to our friends across Northern Virginia. So I live in Vienna, Virginia, and when COVID first hit, I was actually pretty excited. Quite frankly, this is bizarre because we could not meet at Madison High School. Our church meets at a high school, and Fairfax County kicked us out. And I thought that gave us a clear thing that we couldn't meet, so I didn't have to fight with whether we were going to meet or not those first couple of weeks. And I thought for sure we would be back by Easter, and Easter was going to be a blowout. Like, maybe we would have a week or two before Easter, because I think that was like a month or so from when COVID hit. And I thought, okay, we'll have a couple of weeks of not meeting, then be able to meet for Palm Sunday, and then Easter, it's going to be, wow, we got through this. The Easter was a long time ago, so I was completely wrong in that. And then when summer hit and we came out of the like crush in Northern Virginia and DC in May, I thought for sure, okay, by the end of the summer, when fall hits, we're going to be rolling again. Let's get ready to think about the fall. Again, I seem to be off on these things. So I don't know about you, Chris.
Well, I'm still Chris Lugo, assistant pastor, even though I feel lost without a beard, very unbiblical. And yeah, I felt like it was only going to last for probably maybe a month or so. I really thought it was going to, I didn't really take in the severity, which I was kind of like everyone. We didn't have a lot of information about it. I thought, okay, this is different. I was trying to process it as it went along, but I really thought what clinched it for me was when they said, hey, kids aren't going to school anymore. That's what for me really kind of said, whoa, this must be serious, because now my children are going to be with me all the time. So that's how I knew the level of severity. But yeah, I really thought that it was only going to be probably about a month or so, and that very much like the swine flu, there was a lot of fear surrounding that, but we didn't close down schools and stuff like that. Obviously it's very different, but yeah, I thought it was going to be short as well.
In light of that, then what have been some of the harder things for you over the last several months? And I'll go first on this one. So one, I'm thinking as we do this together, it's doing this together. So learning about lighting and audio and filming and going online and realizing that the two-dimensional experience does nothing for me from a broadcast standpoint. The number of times my audio was off, the number of times my kids have said, Chris's mic is way better than yours. What's wrong with your mic? It's been one thing after the other. So the number of times I've watched and thought, wow, I have really big holes around my eyes. It's like I'm a raccoon. So that's at least been one experience. It's been rough. But
yeah, no. The beauty of being a televangelist all of a sudden was that you realize just how, funny you look on camera. Yeah. It's been humbling for sure in that sense, because we can't seem to get things right numerous times, especially early on. That wrestling with technology, with trying to do this, trying to provide something, was just frustrating, because it wasn't anything not only that I was trained to do, but it also wasn't things I enjoyed doing, and having to learn. And the team at Christ Church Vienna, there was Sabrina did a great job, others that were stepping in, helping us to solve things. But that was not a fun first spring season of trying to figure these things out, and what does it look like to do church in a way that is completely unnatural. It's not the way we're meant to do it. And that was really hard. That involved a lot of, trying on shoes for the first time that didn't quite fit. And that's been, something we've grown into a little bit, but was certainly hard right away. I mean, I can think of others as well, too. I don't know. Chris, what about you?
Yeah, it's kind of a little different for me, because I'd already been doing at least camera work and video things previous. So it was the biggest challenge, I think, from a ministry standpoint, was I had only been at Ascension for about 7 months. Mm-hmm. So getting to know people, you're just trying to get your feet wet the first 6 months and figure out what are you doing, and trying to hone those skills. But just getting to know people beyond that and not being able to see them, that was difficult, and it still has been difficult. I mean, now that we have outlets like Zoom and stuff like that, right, it's a little different. But I think probably more so from a personal standpoint, I have to say, bar none, and my wife would totally agree with this, has been parenting. Parenting has, we talk about there are things that happen in your life that kind of expose your sinfulness or your selfishness, right, like getting married, having children. But man, COVID parenting with my children at home all the time has to have been the all-time most difficult thing I've ever, like, it exposed a lot of the flaws in my parenting that I
I feel like that's a common thing. I can certainly relate to that. Is, my kids are older than yours, but all of a sudden there was all of us in the house all the time. And our house has some little pockets, but it felt like, especially early on, we were constantly on top of each other, let alone the frustrations. I have teenage and college age kids, their frustrations about not being connected socially the way they're used to. So the outlets of relationships for them, the confined space, and yet I had to constantly remember I'm living in a space with other people. I have friends, a sister who live alone or live by themselves, and the loneliness factor is incredibly hard. I've heard that again and again from people who live alone because they're used to the connections, seeing other people in work and life, and having that stripped away. So it's like, here I am feeling crushed sometimes with the space issues in a house with 5 of us, and yet also thinking, there are people who have the opposite of that hardship of just wrestling with no one else in the space and no one to talk to in person.
Right. Yeah, the real extremes of that.
What about you, Dean?
Yeah, as a parent, I think for me, I had a high school senior like Johnny did, and so watching the lamenting with them of everything they lost in the spring, and then some real success in getting kids who got to go to college, for at least some semblance of college in the fall. But coming back to it now, my other son plays basketball and realizing he's going to play and I'm not going to get to see him, which those of you who know me and our church, like, that's a major way I relax, release, connect to the community.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time in stands and sidelines, so I'm really like, oh man, he just had tryouts this week. I'm glad he made it, but
it's amazing how
another layer of lamenting, like, oh crap.
Yeah, there's so many little losses that but are really grief. They're full of a lot of grief for us in those things, like the loss of a graduation year, or connecting with friends, or playing in front of your parents, a small group done the way it's normally done, just even eating out with friends or having them over. It's just a lot of loss, even without any grand losses. It's these smaller losses that are part of the joys of life that aren't there right now or haven't been.
In the midst of all that, what have you guys done, you or your families or even folks in your churches, that have helped keep you sane? Thriving might be a little strong for a verb, but have helped you the last several months.
Yeah. What I've done is I've burned things. No, I mean, literally, like, you saw, if you would have watched our early church services, we had them outside for COVID reasons. We were filming outside, and I had a fire pit always. And I would sit out by that fire pit until I couldn't sit out by it anymore. And then this fall, fires in the fireplace. And there's something about it. This was one of the simple joys of life, is sitting by a fire, that is the beauty of it and the warmth of it. And it really did cause me to be thankful to God. So I found that both for our family as well as for me as an individual, just taking the ability to be outside, find a small thing, which for me was whether it was a fire pit outside, and then being able to have a couple people over safely, or the fireplace inside the house now that it's gotten colder. It's been having something that is a joy that feels normal, but is also a deeper joy than that. Because even when there isn't COVID, I enjoy those things. So it was finding something that I enjoyed and pressing into it and giving thanks to God more than I used to for those things.
Yeah, we received a fire pit from a family graciously probably about a month and a half ago, and we've just taken full advantage of just constantly burning things.
Really wish we had sponsorship of fire.
I know, fire pits, a company.
Rio and Solo are sponsoring this today.
But it's true. It's something that we could just kind of gather around. It was something new, so the kids were just like, "Oh, this is so cool! What can we do with this?" And you're like, "Well, not a lot, but just stand safely near it. Just throw as much as you can in there." And we've tried to take advantage of like the things that we would say we were too busy to do. So we've been trying to teach our oldest, which is 6 years old, how to play Scrabble. It's something that me and my wife like to play. So it's like things that we normally wouldn't have done on the day-to-day. Things like Scrabble, taking a walk, like getting out of the house that's just the hard part, because it feels so small because you're always in there. Yeah. That getting out for us has been able, especially with a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, like going to a park, walking on a trail. Sometimes we'll tell her to take a lap around the neighborhood by herself, just to kind of
Burn
like
some
be
energy,
outside.
be
Yeah,
outside.
we have a burning theme going on here. So it's like, if not fire, your energy, please go and just do this. So yeah, I think it's been like the simple things, because those are the things I think that are available to us.
One of the first things we did for probably the first 3 or 4 months was every Sunday afternoon, we ended up taking a walk with good friends of ours who lived just down the street. It just sort of snowballed after the first couple of weeks, and that ended up being sort of a regular. And if you talk to any pastors, you'll see most of us feel like our jobs have been multiplied, not thinned down. So there was something about being done with worship, however I was lit, or audio, however well that went in the morning, feeling like I knew I was going to have a way to walk and do something in the afternoon. We did that up till the summer, and then haven't quite picked it back up. That was a really nice bridge, so that first sort of wave to get through.
That reminds me of something we discovered into early on, because we moved church to the online format. Is I would get to the end of that time, we'd clean up, and I'd be kind of worn out a little bit by the whole process of Sunday morning. But we started doing, while all the kids were at home before my 2 oldest went off to college, we did family brunch. So we would cook up pancakes, bacon, eggs, make it a big meal, sometimes pull out the silver, literally like just set up like a big brunch, just to enjoy that space that used to be kind of this sacred elongated day of church and the various aspects of it, and to have some other, almost sacramental element to it. And it was actually a real joy to do that, just to have that one time that we would gather kind of after the church when I was done and everyone was back in place and our house was back to a house, and to be able to have brunch together. It was fun. Yeah.
What have been the other good things? That's a good segue to that your church has done or you've seen that have been really positive, either individuals or things you've done as a church. You're like, wait, that's actually worked. This is actually good to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think that because we had to do such a major shift, like a lot of churches, like how many churches before COVID had an online presence beyond a website?
Right.
Like
right.
that's kind of the question.
On our podcast today before COVID.
Really?
Yeah.
That to me has been the most interesting aspect of going from that low of a number to pretty much, it has to be in the 90%. Like if you're not having that online, then I can't imagine what's happening. But I feel like, at least for Ascension, where we've talked about this in our staff meeting, where what does online worship look like, especially if you've never done it before. And we were really trying to figure out and navigate, what does this look like that adheres to the beauty and the history of Anglicanism, as well as glorify God, as well as reaching outsiders who are looking and wondering what in the world is going on in our world. So I think from where we were, when I'm thinking like March, when this was all being talked about, to now, just the nature of how that has changed and how it's been fine-tuned. And I feel like we've gotten a lot of really good feedback from the bishop, from people to the bishop, to people who have just discovered us, where we've had people come in this past year who saw us on a website, saw our service, and now are a part of our church. And so I think that, I say that because that has been such a fundamental change. Those two things, discipleship and worship, are going to be the two, and those are kind of big categories, but those are going to be the two things going into the future that are going to be, and I'm lumping evangelism kind of in both of those. I think those are going to be massive going forward in the church.
We did something early on that was both a hit and a miss. We, fairly early on in the spring, broke our church into neighborhood groups, so that there were groups of 30 to 80 adults based on geography, and we were trying to get people in proximate relationship with one another for the purpose of what we actually weren't sure how dangerous this virus was, and whether we were going to have homes that were hit and people that were suffering, that were literally struggling physically and needing people to care for them, but to do so safely. So we broke the church into neighborhood groups, and for multiple weeks each neighborhood group was being led by a core group of facilitators that were getting together for Zoom phone calls, praying together, all digitally, and that broke down in that way. And it was a really neat thing to see as we started in on that, eventually the intensity of those first couple of weeks wore off. Some of those groups ended up not carrying on, even though we still have the geographic data there. But others kept going, and it was just one other way to get people connected to one another. So it was both a hit and a miss, in a sense that it didn't carry on fully, but we also didn't need it to. We weren't triaging real tragedy left and right.
Right.
And yet people were kind of being present for one another. People got to know each other. There's one lady in our church who celebrated her 90th birthday, and some of the people in her neighborhood group didn't know her. She was a quieter woman in our church, and they got to know her. They called her regularly and really enjoyed her because she's just a fun woman, loves God, and has a great spirit. And so people who got to know her started calling her, checking in on her regularly. I was like, okay, that's the church being the church.
Cool.
The other one is several mission opportunities, and the work that Rod Nunez and Jorge and Cote, our missionaries from Chile, started doing in connection to the Latino community enabled us to facilitate something in Vienna where we were providing grocery gift cards to families on free and reduced lunch to all the schools in and around Vienna, combined with several other churches, and our church was incredibly generous in that. Like, it was, I saw this desire to do something, but because of COVID, the inability to do it, and that enabled many of our people to step in and provide care, some of them hands-on with packing groceries, and others just through generosity. And the sheer volume of generosity in that moment from like April through the end of the summer was amazing. So I was really proud of our church in that. But it was also this unique opportunity to care for people whose livelihood had been pulled out from under them when all the kind of the hourly wage jobs were stopped. And so it was neat. It was neat to see that, and that was one of the good things that I think we can carry forward even years from now.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think I'd say those extremes, the places, proud of our people, the places where they figured out ways to get together, be it in backyards or walks or neighborhoods. There's been a lot of that sort of little smaller pockets of people and ways to care for people, and then the willingness to be adaptable. Because we've done there have been some really lovely things that have happened over Zoom that we wouldn't have been able to do, frankly. The art call, we have an artist in the church who led 7 or 8 weeks of teaching people how to draw. The age range on that was really big. People loved that.
The Zoom call that we got to share on with
David Taylor.
That was fantastic. People in our church loved that, and the book was great. That was a real gift, going through the Psalms.
Yeah, I feel like the Lord prepared that book feels like the Lord prepared us for that timing. Because even with some of the transition into the summer and the explosion of the racial tension, the weeks that we had lined up months before for those weeks just fit. And I felt like the Lord prompted that right there. I was really thankful for that. And our small group, hello to my small group, it's been great this fall. And the geography is way spread all over from D.C. to Fairfax. And there's no way we could meet without that too. So those things have been pretty great in the midst of it all. And knowing none of this, we keep saying none of this is optimal.
No.
We'd like to be together. So.
Yeah.
What things have you learned, just maybe about in any way, smaller things, surface things, deeper things, like in a funny way? In the first 6 weeks, we learned how much food we were throwing away in lunches. I often pack the lunches for my kids, and I realized, oh my gosh, we're saving a lot of money because I'm not packing lunches. They're not eating. Now, granted, they're eating way healthier and way more food at home, so we're not eating bread anymore in the house, so our carb intake went way down. What are things you guys have learned?
This is something that I think many of us have learned, and I have as well, is the value of relationships, actual people. One of the things that COVID pulled out from us is the natural connections with people. If we're talking about church, the amount of contact that you have with people before and after a church service is significant. And over the course of time, if you're regularly there grabbing coffee afterwards, checking a kid into something beforehand, you have these conversations that feel like you're connected to one another, let alone all the other ways in which we regularly spend time together in each other's homes, out at restaurants, playing sports together, doing whatever, coaching a kids team, being in a book discussion. And all of that was gone and has been, and we've been trying to refigure out how to do it. But I feel like it's the value of human relationships and human contact and the need for that. I mean, on the far side of COVID, my hope is that we don't just go back into the rhythms of the intensity of Northern Virginia and DC, where career and kids and next thing, an event and whatever, and it becomes a series of scheduled events as opposed to people. And it really is the value of people and being with people and deepening relationships. And where people have not had those, I've seen that seen them hurting the most, where people did not have deep relationships to lean into in this time. And I think there's something that has been brought to the fore for me is people matter, relationships matter, and outside of your immediate family. Your nuclear family is very, is an important thing. Not everyone has a spouse or kids. Everyone needs to have friends and needs to have deep friendships. And the deeper that those are, the wider that net is, I think the more you feel that you're not alone in something that is very, that creates a lot of loneliness right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, I think it's been, again, because I've done seminary, like I've done work full-time and then seminary part-time, seminary's goal is to train you. I mean, it's a training session. Like a lot of people love the theology of God, and which I enjoy as well, but it's training you for ministry. And COVID has completely upended a lot of that training. A lot of things are the same. And so the thing that kind of hit me that I knew in theory and that I've preached before, and that it's one of those things, is like, I know this and I've said this before, but COVID really put a real hard stamp on it, was the notion that the church is not resigned to a building one day a week for 1 hour.
Yeah, that's good.
And I think that and that has really just kind of thrown me, where it's just like, you know what, wherever we're gathered, regardless of where we're at, that's the church. Yeah. And rather than, here's the address, come here, and then when you leave, the church is still there, you go home. And so it's really kind of brought, because I'm at home with my family, it has created this, okay, now that I'm worshiping in my living room, which I know some people, see like, well, people are going to get lazy and stuff like that. I've seen kind of the opposite occur as well, where I have seen people realize, especially when it comes to family ministry and children's ministry, it's like, oh man, the spiritual well-being of my children now is thrusted upon my lap. I can watch a video, but they're watching videos all day. Now we're facilitating kind of the life and breadth of the church wherever we go. Yeah. And I think that's so readily apparent now in my life more than any other time. Again, it's something I've known in theory, but now has been exposed to say, hey, wherever we go, Jesus is there. And wherever we gather, that is who we are. We are the church, not this specific building for this 1 hour, which I think helps facilitate discussion beyond, like church and work, church and family. All of those little subcategories all comes from our definition of what we think the church is and where it is. Yeah. And so that's really kind of blown up that whole
And I think that's
notion.
Something that as leaders in the church and as people in the church, we're going to have to figure out, what does it look like to carry on the good parts of that moving forward? Is what does it look like to recognize that there's a great benefit to being gathered together as the people of God, celebrating, worshiping, sacraments, etc. But there is something in God being present in our homes, in our workplace, in our walking through the neighborhood that is a part of what he wants to do in this world, that it's always about the Spirit in you as you and your family, you and your friends, whatever, you're the church too, and that there is a calling to that. And so how do we leverage that? How do we move that forward as a part of impacting not just our own lives, but the world around us?
Yeah, and see it as I think we've talked about this before, but as a disruption, not just, if we get back to what it was. Like, this is a huge systemic shift.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's we talk at our church a lot, and I've talked at Christ Church Vienna about orientation, disorientation,
Yes.
reorientation. As a part
We know
of
we actually
art,
build
right?
it off. We say this is
Nice.
Dean's language, even though he claims there's some theologian he bought it off of. But it's
Yeah,
really
right.
like I always
Call it
say.
mine.
Remember how Dean talked about disorientation? We use it
Yeah.
again and again.
But
It's really helpful.
It struck me the last few weeks, like it's still disorienting, and there's no end of the tunnel
No.
yet. You know, the pandemic and the vaccine. I know we've talked
Right.
a little bit, but like, okay, the numbers of protocols we're all having to figure out to meet.
Yeah.
Now put the vaccine in the mix. What's it look like to gather and think
Right.
about that, and all the variables, and it's still disorienting. So what's it mean to hold fast and seek the Lord and love people and all those things that
You know-
how do we distill out? There have been some fantastic things that have really worked to the kingdom's benefit, and how do we keep those? How do we keep after those?
I feel like one of the things I've also seen the necessity of, and it comes to bear on what you were saying, Chris, about like you're having to parent your kids or whatever, and church isn't meeting in the forms that it did before, is the necessity of cultivating your own spiritual life and practicing the presence of God in daily life. That if my personal life doesn't have elements of prayer, quiet, listening to God, reading something, not just because I'm a minister, but because I'm a Christian who needs to be connected to God, that I can't just be dependent on showing up for an hour and 15 minutes once a week and being like, okay, I've got my fix of God.
Right.
That if that's not there in the same format or in a way that's satisfying, because some people just really struggle with an online church format, how are you cultivating Christ in your daily life? How are you connecting to the Spirit? How is God's Word, the Psalms, prayer, regular aspects of your life drawing you closer to God? And there's a real necessity for that personal, devotional, spiritual, in whatever way that looks for you. And there's lots of ways, we can kind of give some wisdom if that's something you've struggled with, but that is so vital. And I think it will be even when the church gets back to meeting weekly. Like, they don't just depend on the church to create something for me.
Yeah.
I need to be able to seek God today
Yeah.
and then do it tomorrow.
Yeah, I have an example of just that this week, because I've just been trying to develop, now that there's an app, it's made it so much easier for me to do the daily office. Like, it's just great because I can just hit this app.
This is our second sponsor desire. So
Yes,
Daily Office,
pick it up.
That's all it's called on the App Store. It's fantastic.
But it is, it's great because it's just, I'm already on my iPad 90% of the time anyway, that I've just been trying to get into the habit to do morning and evening prayer. And so my oldest daughter she's kind of going through this phase of, I don't believe that God is real. Sometimes it's just to egg us on as parents, but it's also something that she's questioning a lot. And so we've been going through it together. She's asked because she loves to read. So I'll let her read through it, and then I'll read through it. I'll let her be the celebrant, and I'll be the people. And so we'll read through that together. And a lot of times, like last night was a prime example where, she told us, I don't think that Jesus is real. And we just kind of asked her questions why, and she was kind of being silly about it. And then I woke her up this morning. And so when I woke her up this morning, she goes to bed with books. So she'll have like 40 books around her. Well, one of those was her Bible. And so it's not to uplift myself like, oh, I'm such a great parent, but spiritually, like, I've realized that the actions that I'm doing at home, which again is one of these, I know that in theory, the practical application of me doing morning prayer and evening prayer, not because I'm trying to show it off to her, but because it's for me and my relationship with God, is going to leave an impact on those around me, and especially kind of that centric circle of my family that has kind of grown. And so even in the difficult moments, parenting moments, that has allotted and has placed a lot of responsibility, but has also allowed a lot of opportunity. And that's kind of how I see it, is this COVID has created a lot of challenges, but it's also created a lot of opportunities for me as a dad to instill some healthy spiritual practices for my children.
That's good.
What are some of the concerns you have heading into the winter in 2021?
It's still a long way off. I think the light at the end of the tunnel, it's glimpses of it, but winter is going to be really hard. I particularly am worried for people who live alone, honestly, because I think we've this fall had a little more freedom of connecting with people. eating out at restaurants, fire pits in backyards, even people creating their own bubbles with certain, groupings. But it is that that long, lonely winter where not as much is happening, and the spiritual and psychological. I mean, there's a lot of evidence out there for loneliness and depression being tied together, and this is making something that was already rampant in our country more acute.
Yeah.
And so how do we get to the other side of that and not just focus on ourselves, but think about others out there, even just one person, two people, and that awareness of just how hard this is for all of us, and to maybe help us to push out to one person, two people. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm concerned about. Our church says we've met outside this fall, and it's been great, but it's outside and it's cold, and people are really desperate to be together. So how do we do that in a way that's safe? There's so many church super spreader stories at this point. So always well intentioned, but worldwide. So how do we not be one of those stories, but still meet? I'm trying to figure that out. I'm concerned. One of the things I'm most thankful for is we've done several conversations, both the small group and a series on race and the kingdom of heaven and God's multi-ethnic redemptive plan. And I've been so thankful for several conversations I've had with people in our church who had questions or frustrations. We tried not in that series to cook every idea. We've recommended resources. I don't agree with everything that those people said, but it was great to do it. And then I've been so thankful for folks in our church that have reached back and said, "Hey, I'm frustrated," or "I don't agree," or so those have been great. And what strikes me is, again, the deep need we have to learn how to be people like that, because everybody's gone to their corners on so many different things, and it's a great opportunity. We've said as a church, we belong to a king who is fully human, fully divine. Those are two seemingly opposing ideas, at least difficult in my finite brain to understand, and yet Jesus tells me to hold them in my head at the same time. And so what's it mean to be people like that? So I'm trying to think about with our kids and with our church, how do we do that and demonstrate that? Because like the pandemic is
I also think
going to take some time.
I know that one of the things we were going to talk about is what do we see as opportunities moving forward. I actually see that as one of the opportunities moving forward for the church and for Christians. We are in such a divided culture right now that lacks humility, generosity, and grace with one another. Friends have stopped talking to each other because of disagreements in this past year. And, the things that are going on politically, socially, economically, the pandemic have all kind of layered in on that. But how do we think well and humbly? How do we disagree with somebody but learn from them? How do we demonstrate absolute generosity and grace and not push away from people who we don't fully agree with, but press into them with a loving care for them, and try to get to places that are truly authentic to the gospel and not just our political opinions or our knee-jerk reactions. To think well, but to do so humbly. I think there's a place for the church to model that on a local scale for our own healing, as churches of hundreds of people or dozens of people or 1,000 people, depending on the size of the church, but also for the wider community to say there's something else going on here. Like, they're not afraid of truth,
Right.
but they also aren't afraid to disagree, or they learn how to love and do so humbly. But that humility and generosity is just lacking in our culture. And I think the church, because of the gospel, is set up for that. So I feel like if we can lean into that, what the gospel points us to, the grace and mercy, the humility, the generosity, and say, out of that, what do I have to be afraid of? Do I have to be afraid of losing my position, losing, not being right? There's just so much opportunity there, I
was
think.
struck this week. Kindness is still a fruit of the spirit. Right? It's but it's
Last time
you
short
checked,
supplies,
really?
right? So
Patience
extending
isn't, right?
kindness- Yeah.
It's that one. That one's not
only,
it.
Nope.
Only Monday, Wednesday, Friday.
Okay.
So, right. Like, what's it mean to be a kind? To
Yeah.
demonstrate that kind of firm, loving kindness. Like, I can disagree with you, but you still have value. I still value you as a person. It is. That's a great way to say it, John. It's an opportunity. There's a gap, and a place that the church can fill that gap.
I feel like the church over the next 5 years, it has not had a good reputation in our country over the past 20 to 30, which is unfortunate, but I think there's an opportunity for churches, individual churches, leaders and Christians to press into that in a way that is honoring to God, and honoring, loving, it's basically loving God and loving your neighbor. I mean, quite frankly, like, if you love God well, you love him more than, your team, your politics, your whatever. And if you love other people well, you care about them more than being right in relation to them.
So, Chris, what are things you're concerned about as you think about 2021?
Well, again, I've been learning about the season of Advent. Advent is a new thing for me. Christmas is not. And especially this year over any other year, I feel like Advent being a season that allows me to lament, to be angry and be upset, yet at the same time believe and trust in who God is and his promises. I'm really concerned about the direction where the data is taking us in terms of health, in terms of the impact that COVID is having right now and in the future on low-income families, particularly families of color, where people are not able to work, who had already 2 or 3 jobs, but have lost two of those jobs. And just the impact it has on low-income kids and their education. And I think that just in general, as a body of people, since everyone is made in the image of God, it is also the frustration of tangibly trying to find opportunities and ways to assist and aid those people, rather than just writing a check, which money is important as well, but in an era where we cannot be in large gathering spaces, how to do those. And so my heart just aches because there are no simple solutions and there are no simple answers, and to do so would be an affront to the person and work of Jesus Christ, because just to say, well, just have faith in Jesus, it'll all come together. I think I feel like that's even cruel to say, because I think, as we know, as we talked about the Psalms earlier, the Psalms give us a mouthpiece to say, be angry with God.
Just to jump right on top of that too, we've just celebrated Christmas, which is the incarnation, right? So Advent is this longing for Christ to come again. The incarnation is Christ actually came physically. It wasn't just God saying, hey, I've got a message, I'm going to write it on the sky. It's he embodied our human brokenness, walked in the mess of life, suffered and died with and for us. And that's what he calls us to. He calls us to live in the in-between world in which we do, with that Advent longing, the brokenness of this world, longing for Christ to come, while incarnating the gospel in the lives of the poor and the sick, the suffering, the struggling, the economically disenfranchised, those who are outside, not just to be a part with a good message, but to be incarnated with them, to carry on the work of Christmas, if you would.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think it also allows us, when we're looking at our sermon series and things like that, these conversations about race and racial injustice and those, they come back around. They don't disappear because COVID's now here, but it brings these conversations back again to, okay, why are low-income, predominantly brown and black people affected by COVID, affected in this economic structure? So it brings these back up without being like, oh, we're doing this again. It's like, well, it's all on the table. Here it is. And here's an incarnational conversation about this. So let's have that conversation. Let's speak into these spaces so that we can be the church that the gospel points us to, so that we can point them to that as well, rather than just the vaccine will cure everything. Let's just get everything to go back to normal. I don't think that's what COVID is calling us to. I think it's calling us to change. It's forcing us to change in that way.
And I think if we're looking ahead, that's one of the things we have to do as Christians and as the church. I've read, listened to a lot of things talking about how on the far side of the COVID pandemic, as church leaders, I'm going to have to help my church replant itself. So our church started 9 years ago. Church of the Ascension was 13, 14, 15 years ago. So 10 to 15 years our churches were planted, but we can't just go back. We almost have to replant our churches, and I think we have to do that as individuals as well, as say, who is God calling us to in this new season? COVID has created this in between, this major transition, both for us individually as churches and as a culture, all that we're going through. And I think there's an opportunity for us to say, what is God calling us to in this new world, almost, on the far side of these things, on the far side of this past year? And how do we not just go back? Like, let's try to make it like it used to be. No. God wants us moving forward towards Him in this world in a new way. And what is He calling us to? And I think that's the same calling we as individuals need to do. Like, how am I supposed to be a parent, a father now? How am I supposed to re-enter my career, my work now, the office again? And how is our church supposed to be who God has called us to be in the next 10 years? So really think like 2021 to 2030, what is God calling us to? And take the time to reflect and seek God as we're coming out of this and say,
yeah, because there's been systemic disorientation.
Yes.
That's going to say systemic reorientation on lots of different levels. That's a great way to think about that, John.
Yeah.
Well, these churches exist of people who don't have it all together but are changed by the love of Jesus. And we at Ascension can wholeheartedly recommend Christ Church Vienna. If you live in Vienna or Reston or Herndon and are looking for a church, you can see the links that we'll put up now for their website. They meet usually at 10 a.m. just like we are now, and have small groups and ways to connect and love their community. We at Ascension are at theascension.org, and here's some links for us we hope you'll take a look at. God bless you. We look forward to connecting with you if you want to be a part of our church families. Thanks for being with us this morning.